Very much looking forward to what will be the first in a series of panel discussions on the topic of Te Tiriti or Waitangi and the principles behind it. Now, making this distinction, we're not talking about the Treaty Principles Bill, we're talking about the principles behind the treaty. And today, some fantastic guests on the panel. And if I can ask you each to introduce yourselves as you wish to be introduced. Firstly, Hana Seddon, kia ora.
Tēnā koe, tēnā tātou katoa, ko wai ahau, he uri ahau no Ngāpuhi, te rarawa me ngā iwi o Tauranga Moana, he tangata tiriti hoki. So on my father's side, I hail from Ngāpuhi, from Te Rarawa, from the north, where the treaty was signed, was written, was signed and discussed, and also from Tauranga Moana. And on my mother's side, I'm a Scottish, Irish and English, and a little bit Viking. Yeah. Yes, I lead the Salvation Army, the church and the social services in Rotorua, and it's lovely to be up here in Auckland today.
So nice to have you here. Also joining us by Zoom, Keith Newman. Keith, kia ora.
Kia ora, Andrew. I'm a writer, a scribbler. Been doing that for a while, for a lot of years as a journalist, and have written several books that cover those early years of our history, Bible and Treaty, Beyond Betrayal, Ratana the Prophet. A revision of that was done earlier this year. I'm a sixth generation Kiwi living in Ngāti Kahungunu territory, but I'm an English-Irish extraction and live right by the coast here in Homoana.
And finally, Mark Barnard. Mark, kia ora.
Kia ora mai no tātou, he honore, he kororia ki te atua, mau ngā rongo ki te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Friends, I'm Rev Mark Barnard. I'm originally from the Waikato, grew up on Te Raki Pai Whenua, the North Shore, a bit of time in Whanganui Ātara, Wellington, and back here in Tamaki Makaurau over in Māngere Bridge, still in the Waikato. At the moment, I'm a minister over there at St James Church, which is a little Anglican church under Bishop Kito in the Mihinare Church, and also work for Karuwha, which is an org which helps people engage with the story of Aotearoa. My ancestry is from England and Ireland.
Hey guys, thank you so much, and wonderful to be having a conversation about this. This, of course, is a contentious issue, and we have seen a lot of heat, a lot of passion about this particular issue. But important for us as a nation to decide what Te Tiriti means to us. Hana, first from you, what does Te Tiriti or Waitangi mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's important to distinguish what it means to me versus what it says, because they're two different questions. So I think what it means to me, understanding what it says, is a recognition of the distinct status of tangata whenua, a recognition of pre-existing rights, that the treaty did not make that happen. That already happened beforehand. And as a person who descends from people of the north, just knowing that my tupuna, my ancestors were there, they were part of that. And also as a minister of the gospel, it's important for me to know that we have a Christian whakapapa to the treaty as well, to Te Tiriti, because our spiritual, if you like, ancestors were there involved in what was happening. So that's just a little bit of a sense of what Te Tiriti means to me.
No, very good indeed. Mark, wanting to bring you in on this one. I mean, hey, it could be similar, but do you have anything to add? What does it mean to you personally?
Well, I really like how Hana has framed it around what it means and what it says. I think that's really helpful. I think for me, when I think about what Te Tiriti means, I like to go back to, as a Pākehā, my first encounters and how I entered into this relationship. And I think for me, it's fundamentally starts with relationship. As a sort of snotty-nosed teenager on the North Shore, I became friends with a young Māori kid at my church, and it was that relationship, that friendship that I think threw me into the conversation. So I think for me, I try to go back to this begins with that relationship, and I then want to work from that place of relationship.
And Keith, your thoughts on I mean, as we said before, you've written a book on the topic. What does Te Tiriti mean to you?
Well, to make sense for me of what it meant to be a New Zealander. I mean, I have to admit my ignorance before I began on that journey. I just knew the cliches, but really having understood something for a number of years now and continuing to try and unpack all of that, it becomes exciting. This is an exciting journey. This was almost a world first attempt to try and do things differently in Aotearoa that had been done in other parts of the world. This was a wake-up call for the British, for example, through James Stephen from the Clapham sect, who's just saying we cannot continue to do what we've done as an empire in the past. Look at all the damage that has been done, particularly to Indigenous people. We need to find a new way forward. And his instructions that were sent to ultimately to Hobson gave us the background for the treaty. You know, ultimately we had missionaries translating those words with a conscience that this was to be something different. This was to respect Māori, who had a form of governance of their own already. They were an agricultural people. Their will and their views had to be respected in the formulation of what became Te Tiriti or Waitangi.
Hana, picking up on your point, the difference between what it means and what it says, and again wanting to take what Keith has said of saying, hey, this is what it meant back in the day. Do you think what it means for us today is different than what it meant originally?
Well, if you think about the way that we read the Bible, what it meant then and how that applies to today, they're connected.
Yep.
They're not separate. They're not different. They're connected. It's just that the lives that we live today are not as they were in 1840. But what sits behind the intention of that is really important, because you can apply that in a whole lot of other contexts and situations.
Yep.
So you have to have an understanding. Just like when I'm preparing, say a sermon, I have to have a look at what it meant in the context and not just go straight to what I want it to mean today.
Yeah.
You have to spend some time in the history, in the culture, in the language, in the understanding of relationships in that time. When you're preparing a sermon, you don't just apply it today with limited knowledge. You have to go back and have a deep dive into what that was about. And that's the same for us. When we go back and have a look at what was happening in those times and understand why our treaty was necessary, one of the things that comes up for us is actually 5 years earlier, 1835, was a statement of the obvious, he whakaputanga, the Declaration of Independence. That's part of the context of such an important covenant, Te Tiriti. And so to go back in the history and have a look at that helps us to know how to apply that today.
And certainly seeing some he whakaputanga flags flying in the hikoi that Mark, I know that you've been involved with a little bit of that as well. Why is this worth defending? Why is this treaty important to us as a nation, do you think, Mark?
Oh, look, I mean, Te Tiriti is our founding document, but it's more than a document. I think we can, if we stick with just documents, I think we can come a bit unstuck. Yeah. It's our founding covenant. And I think that's a friend and colleague and mentor, Dr. Alistair Rees, has recently, we've done a tour with him speaking about this very concept around the treaty as a covenant. It's something which binds us together in a spiritual way. It's not just words on a parchment. It's something that goes deeper and beyond that. And I think if we don't engage with those deeper meanings, those spiritual meanings, those sacred meanings, we miss the intent and the hopes and the aspirations and the heart of Te Tiriti. And so I think that covenantal understanding really helps us enter into a deeper intent of Te Tiriti.
I love that point there, actually, because, whilst there's debate about, who should have the right to interpret this, is this something should be happening at Parliament? Should High Court judges do it? Should it just be Waitangi Tribunal, or do we need a referenda on this? That rather than abdicating the responsibility of what Te Tiriti means for us as a nation going forward, let's do that in relationship, let's do that in conversation. Is that the essence of what you're saying there?
I think yes, but even deeper than that, let's deeply honour and respect all those relationships that have gone before us right back to 1840 and before that, those relationships which bound us together. We can't just sit around in a room and go, what do we think about this now? If we don't respect and understand and lean into the whakapapa of this sacred covenant. And I think we can miss that, I guess, in the immediacy of how, in a Western way of understanding, we think of ideas and information as now and instant, and let's have a chat and come up with an idea.
A plan.
Ideas, realities have deep stories and whakapapa, and those are sacred, and we can't just move, quickly have a chat and move on and put it out to the.
We're not going to sort this out in a subcommittee.
No.
Exactly. Keith, just your thoughts on the idea, and just wanting to unpack this a little bit further, because it's all very well to say, hey, let's share what it means to us, but this may be behind some of the conflict that we're seeing at the moment. What if different groups of people have fundamentally different ideas about what Te Tiriti meant back in the day and how we should interpret that now? Is this, do you think, why we're seeing some of the conflict, why we're seeing people being so upset about what's happening in Parliament at the moment?
Well, it could be, but it's the beginning of a conversation, a long overdue conversation. And like Hana said earlier on, did Māori not have rights before the Treaty of Waitangi was signed? Of course they did. They had rights over their lands and the way that they governed their people and all the rest of it. So did the treaty give them new rights? Well, it gave them a promise of protection of the rights that they had, plus being equal to British citizens. But the part of that wasn't honoured was that they weren't treated as equal British citizens, and a lot of those rights that were promised in the treaty were pretty soon undermined. So Māori were looking to participate in the building of a new society. They saw a partnership, and partnership doesn't mean 50-50. It means let's do this together. Let's work out how we're going to make a difference as two people. But what we heard from mostly after that was one people determining the future for the other people who were supposed to be partners. And all these attempts over 100 and something years, multiple attempts to have kōtahitanga or a relationship with government or something other than just 4 members of parliament has gone on and on. And so I think it's come to a head. And really, if we don't have a relationship, then we're not having the right kind of discussion, because a covenant, as it was described so often, is a spiritual thing. And if we take the spiritual component out of this, then we're just talking politics, we're talking militarism, we're talking consumerism, and we miss the God heart of the wonder of what the treaty is offering us as a unique arrangement for two peoples to work out their future together. And I worry, that if we don't sort this out soon and come to some sort of an understanding about what's unique about the treaty and what's unique about New Zealand, we will get overwhelmed by the waves of change that are coming at us technologically, spiritually, and in so many other ways that we will miss the waka. So it's time to back up the waka and decide who we are and how to get on with the business together.
Keith, let's jump into what is perhaps at the heart of some of the controversy in terms of what the treaty means for us. The translation of the treaty, what some people would call the mistranslation of the treaty. There's varying scholarship on this one, but in your opinion, are there two versions of the treaty? Do we need to recognise the differences between the English and the Māori text?
Of course we do, because the majority of Māori signed the Te Reo version that was translated by Henry Williams and his son. So we have to consider what was said, what was understood by Māori who signed it, what was explained to them. But I think we also need to recognise that the original instructions were in English, The original version was in English, and the Māori version is a translation. So, like any good scholarship, you need to hold the two in tension with each other, and that's a conversation. And if we keep staying in that conversation, we're not going to get very far. But I think if we can see the proper relationship that exists there, then we can keep talking. But if it's one or the other, then I think we're going to run into problems like the Te Papa. Some people would call it vandalism, or it was an outworking of a protest expression. That's been sitting there for a long time, both versions side by side. And if that's stirring up some sort of debate and discussion that we need to have, you mentioned Ned Fletcher offline, but there's just so much that we can get lost in. How do we come back to the relationship, the true intent of what was meant there? And if we're going to start talking about tino rangatiratanga, which is Māori self-governance, that's the real core issue now. A lot of Māori are saying, well, actually we were promised independence. We never ceded sovereignty, and that will be the big issue that comes up when Ngāpuhi settle, if they do settle, their treaty issues. And this is what we're going through in Parliament at the moment, which I think is a bit of a Trojan horse to try and remove that obstacle to Ngāpuhi settling the way that they might. They've always said, we're going to create a drama. Yeah. So we're in the middle of that drama, whether we know it or not. And I would suggest we need both versions of the treaty, and we need to have civil conversation, and we need to be considering what the intention was to do something different than had been done anywhere else in the world, and to love one another. If it's Bible and treaty together, and the missionaries interpreted those words, they must have done it lovingly with good intent. Any suggestion otherwise puts further polarization between the peoples who make up this great nation. Iwi tahi tātou, we can do this together, not the John Brash version or the ACT version.
Good clarification there. Mark, your thoughts on this one, because as Keith was indicating there is a view which says that not only was there a mistranslation, but that was a purposeful mistranslation. This was a conspiracy between colonial powers and the missionaries to purposefully mistranslate the words to deceive Māori into signing something to take away their mana, to take away their land and their rights. What's your view on that? Yeah,
in earlier times, I would have held a version of that. Yep. I guess I wrestled with the differences in the translations, and I learned at university and in treaty workshops, and I did really wrestle with how did those seemingly quite disparate translations come to be.
Yep.
There's, as Keith mentioned, there's been some really good, thoughtful scholarship over the more recent times, which has actually sought to bring the two versions together. And I think we do well to look really deeply and carefully at that emerging scholarship, especially Ned Fletcher's work. In saying that, I still think the preference is to be given to the Māori version, not in isolation from, and still in dynamic tension with, but the version that Māori would have understood and engaged with was the Māori version. And also I'd want to add that the concepts are deeply biblical concepts. So the written literature that was available to tangata whenua at the time was scripture and the Book of Common Prayer. And so those words, tino rangatiratanga and kawanatanga, were taken from the Bible. And so what was the conceptual world behind those concepts that Māori understood? And I think that's a really rich conversation. Williams, I believe, really held the text of Scripture and Te Tiriti together with his conversations with rangatira on the night before the signing. There's, those conversations really shaped the understanding. So I think Keith's Bible and treaty is really important in understanding the meaning of Te Tiriti.
Because the problem exists, of course, because if this is if this is purposeful mistranslation, then why do we need the English version? Let's throw it out. This is a deception. It's a fraud. It undermines the whole treaty, Hana.
Look, For those who are listening who haven't really gone into this in much detail, let me say to you that today you can find 9 texts, 9 copies, photocopies if you like, and out of all of those photocopies there are 8 that are written in Te Reo Māori with 500 signatures of chiefs, each chief representing potentially hundreds. So that's 8 copies, over 500 signatures, and there is one in Te Reo English with 30-something signatures. So just that alone. The second thing, there's an international treaty convention that says when there's debate between the two, you need to look to the Indigenous version. You know, and obviously you can see that that's important. One of the things to remember is that, as you mentioned mana before, it's not possible to give away your mana. That's not something that belongs to you, really. So for our people the idea that they would cede sovereignty is actually impossible, even though it's written in English. Doesn't say that in the Māori text. It says we will retain tino rangatiratanga. And if you're looking on the news and you're seeing a whole lot of black, white and red flags flying around like my earrings, Exhibit A. That statement there is, I haven't forgotten what the Māori text says. It says that we have retained and we're covenanted so that our rights will remain, these pre-existent rights will remain. A couple of other thoughts. I don't know that Ngāpuhi's creating a drama. It probably feels like a drama, but the real drama is not honouring the covenant, taking land, rewriting, everything to suit yourself, setting up education and health and all sorts of other systems to suit yourself and preference the descendants of settlers. That's a drama. And that drama has resulted in what I see every day in the Salvation Army, and many of you who serve in churches and social services, which is radical inequity. Inequity in every single negative statistic you can think of. That's the real drama. And so I agree that there needs to be some working together to move things forward, but not forgetting what Mark was saying about the importance of what it is that our people signed.
Yeah, so important. In some ways, this is a metaphor, I suppose. If we have 2 different versions, the translation issue, and as you say, almost all Māori signed the Te Reo version. But if we have 2 different versions of the treaty which are interpreted so differently that mean different things, we're literally not on the same page as a nation. If we could, I mean, perhaps I'm being naively optimistic, but if we could reconcile what both of those versions mean, if we could reconcile both the English and the Te Reo version, would there perhaps be some hope for reconciling us as a people, Hana?
Well, what Ned Fletcher's very gigantic book, which I have not read in detail, says is that he believes they can fit together if you understand that the word sovereignty might not be what you understand the word sovereignty to mean today. You know how words change over time and meanings and application? Well, sovereignty in a very limited form. So sovereignty, for example, over your own people who are coming to settle here. Imagine this. Imagine if, like Ngāpuhi, my people believe that, yes, we're saying to you, we give you sovereignty to look after your people, but in partnership with us so that we all thrive. Can we not get down with that? Can we not get together on that?
Mark, Barnard, just wanted to get your thoughts on this. We were talking beforehand about different interpretations of what Te Tiriti means and the different translations of it. Does it matter if we have different interpretations, different views on this one? What's your thoughts?
Well, yeah, great question. And I think we would expect people to have different views on different things. It would be naive to think that everyone's going to arrive at the same opinion on something. So I think that's important to say. We want to encourage dialogue, discussion, discourse, debate healthily in different spaces. However, what we also have to do when we enter into conversations is remember these conversations have been going on a long time before we turned up. And so we obviously would always do well to honour the whakapapa and the work and the understandings that have come before us. There's generations of tangata whenua who have understood the treaty in a certain way. There are scholars, historians, writers, lawyers, the Treaty of Waitangi Tribunal, who have all come to a pretty solid way of understanding Te Tiriti. So then to kind of throw in a novel and new interpretation is a little bit cheeky / really dangerous. And so I think, yes, of course, wide interpretations. However, we come in a really long stream, and we're foolish to ignore all of that, and deeply disrespectful to ignore all of that which has come before us.
No, that's a very valid point. Keith, do you think, given what Mark's just said, this, of course, explains why people are so passionate about it, why we've seen some of the scenes that have happened on our streets and even in our parliament. Do you think our positions are fixed, people taking their ideological positions and shouting at each other, or are our differences irreconcilable, do you think?
No, they're not irreconcilable. I just think that this is an exciting, challenging, disruptive time in our history where we have to figure out who we are. This is part of our identity discussion as a nation, and it's very late to the game. I mean, if you think about John Key trying to fly a new flag over New Zealand before we'd even, Aotearoa New Zealand, before we'd even decided what it was that we were putting this brand over, I think that will come eventually, and maybe some of those flags that are being flown today, like the Tino Rangatira one, if you understood the meaning behind it, it's actually quite beautiful and quite inclusive.
Yeah.
But, we've had a Māori gathering for the past 10 years or more talking about constitutional transformation way before Pākehā have taken hold of this. So I think Māori are leading the way and saying, actually, we're passionate about the country that we invited you to become part of. Don't go messing with the foundations, and we've got to get our foundations right. And principles are part of that. So what are the principles? They're not fixed. Principles are something that you can discuss. Principles are something that has been said are something of good faith. So we need to come back to that good faith. I mean, the good faith in the scriptures, yes, but good faith in each other to be able to work this through. I think 100 years ago, Tahupōtiki Wirimuratana went to England with a treaty petition with 40,000 signatures on it asking that the treaty be honoured. Yeah. The New Zealand government representatives undermined him and said he doesn't represent Māori. But that was 2/3 of the signatures of all Māori. He did an amazing job of not only bringing together the signatures, but the case for settlement of treaty. But he was carrying forward the words of the Māori prophets. He was carrying forward the intentions of the kotahitanga movements that had been shut down previously. So we're on a hikoi. We are on a journey, and I think it's quite an amazing thing that we have a hikoi of multiple thousands of people about to converge on Parliament. Yep. And the very thing that perhaps Mr. Seymour had not foreseen is that he has been a catalyst in bringing Māori together with a single voice, as is King Tuheitia. We're at a historical intersection where we have to rethink who we are. And to me, if it's not about a relational thing and it's all about legalism, then like the Bible, if you get legalistic, you miss the whole point of what Christ was trying to say. If we get legalistic about the treaty and we don't act in good faith, we're missing the point of what those two partners, those two sovereign nations agreed to when they signed. Hei iwi tahi tātou, we two peoples can do this together. Let's get excited about the future. That's my feeling about this. Let's use this as a leverage to have that proper discussion at the right time and not get distracted by the Trojan horse of the moment.
Kia ora, thank you so much for that. Just wanting to pick up on this idea of hikoi, of course, a physical hikoi happening at the moment. Mark, you have been involved with that. Hana, you're going to be involved with that when it arrives in Wellington. But I appreciate there'll be people listening to this at the moment who are also on a hikoi. They're on a bit of a journey. Perhaps their understanding of Te Tiriti and what that means is influenced by other things, such as social media. There'll be people that are watching what's unfolding in our nation and pushing back on some of those ideas. What would you say, Hana, to encourage people to take some steps forward on their hikoi in their journey of understanding of Te Tiriti and what it means for us as a nation?
First, I want to demonstrate that by saying to you that this morning in Rotorua, where I live and where I woke up this morning, is where the hikoi arrived last night and the activation was happening today. But because I love you and your listeners, I chose to come away from the place I wanted to be.
Yeah.
Why? Because you who are listening this morning, this afternoon, whatever time of day it is where you are, because you need to know why we would even get together and do that, why we would take steps forward, why we would take steps together. And so that's right, there are some who are right up the front of the hikoi carrying the banner. And in the church, that's me and that's many of us that are here. We're right up the front carrying the banner of understanding, and Lord, show us your way, and what does it look like to reconcile and have a beautiful understanding of Te Tiriti and its promise and its hope. There are some who are trailing along at the back who got there late to the discussion. Some of you listening only just arrived to the fact that we have a treaty, that means something. Some are watching online curiously, but they don't want to kind of like or put any emojis on Facebook to suggest that they're interested in this conversation. And some are actively unaware and don't want to know, right? But I believe that the Holy Spirit is calling us into a deeper and deeper understanding so that we can all take these steps forward together, because God will work all things together for good. So it doesn't matter that there are two, well, we're already where we are, right?
Yep.
If I think about in the 1970s, my father and many in Ngā Tamatoa hit the streets, and there weren't thousands of them necessarily back then. And my tupuna, started from the top of the North Island in 1975, Dame Whina Kupa, and marched all the way down to Parliament.
Yep.
And so I get to do that on Tuesday with thousands of other people. Why? Because it matters. But it looks like stupidity, right? It looks foolish to those who don't have a clue. But so does Christianity, and so does the cross.
Yep.
If you don't get it, it looks stupid until you understand the power and the promise. And once you understand it, whānau who are listening, not only, I believe, will you get it and watch online, but you'll now want to figure out, what can I do where I live and where I have influence to actually be part of something beautiful, so that this land together, Aotearoa New Zealand, that we together, as the church leads by example, a whole lot of other people will figure out how we can move forward together. And that flows right out across the globe. And that's our calling. It's part of our calling to bring justice, to bring reconciliation, to bring transformation. But until we get our covenant relationship sorted, our relationship here at home first, what right do we have going telling anyone else to reconcile themselves?
No.
That's all I have to say. And I've taken notes too, by the way. That's why I keep looking at my phone. I'm not texting, I promise.
That's absolutely fine. And Hana, we very much appreciate you making a choice to be here. Really appreciate what you have to say. I suppose in our discussion today, it's important to recognise, yes, there's different views and opinions, but we can't be in a space where each does what seems right in their own eyes. I suppose we need to have something which unites us together as a country. And there's discussions about who should have the right to decide. Should that be High Court judges? Should that be politicians? Should that be a referenda? And there's we're not going to get into the weeds on this one, but Mark, just wanting to get your thoughts on how the church should respond. How should the church be a part of that process? And Hana, you kicked us off on that one really strongly, but how do you see the church's role in reconciliation and moving forward in this hikoi?
Yeah, I think the church, well, we were there at the signing of Te Tiriti. My ancestors in the faith as an Anglican. So I take that really seriously. And so we need to be there. We have to be right in the middle. And by the middle, I don't mean in places of, position. I mean right in the midst of it all.
Yep.
And if that means getting cups of tea and, marshalling people along at hikoi, then that's what it means. If it means just helping out at the local marae, then that's what it means. If it means going to the local school and helping out at kapahaka, then that's what it means. So as followers of Jesus, we need to figure out what it means to be in the midst of this. And that doesn't mean taking the front. It means taking the place of the servant, like Jesus, our servant leader, shows us to. Karuwha, Henry Williams, was an incredible servant and a friend of tangata whenua, and was a peacemaker and an educator, and the way in which he worked with his wife, Mary Ann Williams, the way in which they worked amongst tangata whenua was as friend and servant. And I think that's our role. We need to continue to take that role with humility, with dignity, with respect and grace, and be listeners and learners and help where we can and where we're asked.
A wonderful vision, and hey, I want to thank all of you for your contributions today. It has been a good conversation, and it is so important to be having this chat. I know for some people that say, no, we don't want to talk about this anymore. And hey, If not at select committee, then in our communities, in our churches, in our families, let's talk about what it means to us as a nation. And Mark, love that challenge there of being servant leaders, not just in the conversation, not just pushing our views and our opinions forward, but serving those who are deeply impacted by this, an important conversation to be having. Keith, just we've got about a minute to news, but anything that you'd like to say as we wrap up this conversation?
All I can say is that I think Māori have been incredibly gracious, and most of the time have come toward Pākehā. I mean, when Ratana submitted his petition, or when Tirakatini submitted the petition, it was to preserve the ties of brotherhood between Pākehā and Māori for all time. And, we're joined at the hip. We can't get away from each other. We are in relationship. We've intermarried. The bedroom has been the great coming together. We have to figure out how we're going to be in the world down here where the sun first rises, to show an example to the rest of the world. And other Indigenous people are looking to how we do this too, because I think we have the perfect model. We're the small place in the world where the light can shine. Yeah. So in our churches, as Mark says, let's be friends. Let's be friends to tangata whenua, as Henry Williams was. Let's carry that journey forward. Let's carry this hikoi with excitement about what the future might hold. Let's shine a light. Let's be the maramatanga that everybody looks to and says, those guys have figured out how to walk together in unity and in diversity. So big hope. We've got to have hope for the future generations.
Fantastic conversation. My thanks to Keith Newman, Mark Barnard and Hana Seddon. This is the first of 3 panel discussions. Love to get your thoughts and comments as well. Text 8168, keyword Rhema, or of course join the conversation on Facebook. Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.